City of Stevens Point Age-Friendly Commission meeting, recorded December 10th, 2024.
So,
Okay.
Chair, I will leave it to you.
Okay, we will call this meeting to order and start with roll call.
Giblin,
Yeah, here.
Wigginton,
Here.
Agana,
Here.
Douglas. I know she usually comes in a couple. I'll leave her blank for right now. Jerry. Here. Miller.
Present.
Wall, I don't see, and then Zarazu I know is excused. But got 5 members, which is a quorum.
Great. Moving on to the report of September 19th, 2024 meeting of the Age-Friendly Commission. Anything to add? Corrections? Hearing none, do we need to approve this or?
Correct. Yeah, we'll need
So
a motion
moved.
in a second.
I'll second. No questions.
Okay. No discussion? Okay, all right. Item 3, review of quantitative and qualitative.
We'll need a vote.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay.
So we have a motion and a second, then just all those in favor.
All those in favor?
Aye.
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 Opposed.
All those opposed?
All those opposed?
This is very formal, so you're good.
You're good.
I'll get there.
Took me years to figure that stuff out.
Years. Okay, good. I'm only months into this. Okay. Okay, item 3, review of quantitative and qualitative data received through the county needs assessment.
All right, so I'm just gonna kind of summarize the work that we as a group and internally I as staff have been doing about the last year or so. So as the reason I want to have this conversation first and foremost is to kind of do a collective review of all the data that was received, as that will be the perfect segue into really phase 2 of the work of this commission, and that's being to formulate the aging plan in and of itself. And the data that's received is also ultimately going to be the crux of the recommendations that are going to be borne out by that planning document. So I mentioned this to, I believe, you folks in the past, in that I'm a firm believer that in order to get a quality assessment of where we as a community are, regardless of what planning topic you're talking about here in this situation about aging, you want to have a good representation of the different types of data that's being collected. You can't put all your eggs in one basket of quantitative data and disregard the qualitative data, right? Mm-hmm. I think we've all heard stories over the years of people, talking about the social participation domain that I'll touch on in a little bit. People are understandably not as willing to discuss if they feel a sense of isolation or loneliness through a surveyor or through some other online platform. So having this qualitative data, having more one-on-one conversations, small group conversations, having more interpersonal communication, I think provides that healthy balance to make sure that the end result, the end conclusions that we're receiving as a result of this project is ultimately going to be representative of about what the community wants in a nutshell. So just want to kind of ingrain this again. We've talked about this, I think, every meeting. Just want to highlight this again. Ultimately, the structure of the work that we've done over the last year and what we will be doing going forward, we'll be touching on these domains of livability, and I'll touch on these a little bit more as it relates to the data that was received over the last year. So what I really envision this exercise being, this conversation tonight, is to kind of go section by section here and outline what are the major themes that were discussed, what are the major takeaways that we as a group, I internally, when looking through one-on-one conversations, when looking through the survey results, what are some of the main takeaways that we've received through each of these 8 domains of livability? So I'm going to start first off with housing. Again, this is really in no particular order. Naturally, I think these first three that are shown on the screen are ones that people have a lot of opinions on. These are issues, these are topic areas that are more in the public realm in terms of how people associate aging with this given domain. So I'm going to start out first with housing. What are some of the main takeaways? Number one being that there is ultimately a desire amongst our residents to stay in their own home and never move. That's their ultimate end goal. If they can make that work, they'd rather stay in their home and not have to relocate either to another residence, a senior living facility, or some other type of housing arrangement. You can come up front here, Caroline. Kate, if you want to. Next takeaway, next theme rather, is just that folks generally are supportive of a co-familial housing arrangement, and less so with a housing arrangement that consists of friends or strangers. Not really shocking. You're more willing to cohabitate with people of your family if you need a new place of housing, but you're less so with friends and strangers. Third being that there's a significant amount of homes that need major improvements in order for folks to age in place. A good chunk of our housing stock, and it's not unreasonable, it's not shocking if you think about it. There's a lot of homes that are not in our community that are not
Accessible.
I'm thinking of the right, zero-step entry. Accessible, sure. That there's a couple steps to get into the house, that there's other means that just make it seem as not being accessible for folks to live in that house once they reach their 50s, 60s, 70s, and onward. Fourth is that the median age of our housing stock is high, and naturally that results in greater maintenance costs for the individual property owner, and also pass through from landlords down to renters for those who rent. And then the last one, housing affordability. I have this note in here, and that is it going to be this topic of housing affordability? Is this going to be consistent? Is this going to be borne out through data collected in future years, or is it more so a situation of the present? You know, inflation still being high, just the times that we're living in. So, I mean, that would be one curious nugget that I can make an argument one way or the other. But still, nonetheless, I think that's a really good topic area to consider when we work on this aging plan is a whole concept of housing affordability. Is this an issue that we see as a community that's still going to exist in the next 5 years, 10 years? If so, that's a really significant data point. That's a significant factoid that we need to include within this plan. So I'm going to stop right here. Comments, thoughts, anything that jumps out?
I do want to kick in on affordability. I think that is going to remain an issue because the gap in income and the cost of housing has grown so large. I think that it's going to take a while. And from a personal standpoint, I've talked to an increased number of older adults who are coming to our resource center looking for help with housing because they cannot afford the housing stock or the apartments that are available. The wait list is very long for affordable housing through both Portage County and Stevens Point housing authorities. So I'm seeing an increase in that being an issue.
Mm-hmm. And I think, as it relates to I included housing affordability as a broad umbrella. Obviously, there's many factors that are contributing today as to why housing is so expensive. Part of it is the lack of supply, right? Part of it is the age of our housing stock, and there's just a lot of maintenance costs that's involved, and that naturally being flushed down to prospective buyers and renters as well. So there's a lot of reasons as to why housing affordability is an issue. So I'm really glad that you brought that up.
Yeah. The other thing we're seeing is that there's some new ownership of lower income housing, and we're seeing that there are people who are being priced out / evicted from those places, it seems. at a much more frequent rate, so. The winter is always kind of a crisis point for housing, but we're seeing more of it. So thank you, yeah.
And these are generally older adults?
Older and disabled.
Any other thoughts or comments? Anything that's missing?
I think this is spot on.
Okay. Perfect. Next then, transportation. General takeaways, one being that there's a problem with reading and interpreting traffic signs. This is touching a little bit more so on the educational component and less so on actually visually reading the signs. Second being that streets and intersections, broadly speaking, there's areas that are better and areas that are worse, but generally speaking, streets and intersections are not well lit, accessible, and safe for most users. Third being that, just the fact of the matter that, here in Stevens Point, Wisconsin, we still live in a auto-centric community, particularly in areas outside of the urban core, so really outside of the downtown. So the ability to bike from one end of town to another, the ability to walk from one end of town to another. Yes, there may be some bike and walking pedestrian infrastructure in place. There's gaps, and even with that infrastructure in place, some people are just not willing or not able to take those longer commutes, and as a result, they rely on other modes of transportation, driving, car share, public transit, and the like. And then the last being that majority of folks say that we have a below average accessible public transit system. I think as what we saw, especially during the social over at the Piffner building in the fall, I think one big component of this is the education piece. People are not aware so much about the size of our public transit system, where's the bus stops, what's the route, where you can obtain real-time information as to where a bus is, when are the pickup times. So I think part of it is an educational system, but don't get me wrong. I mean, I think if it's a choice for people to wait 20, 30 minutes at a bus stop versus that of driving from one point in town to another, there's a subset of our population that are still more willing to drive because they don't want to wait. General takeaways, transportation, again, kick it back to the group. Is there anything missing that you see, or just thoughts overall?
Not very aging in place friendly.
Not ours. Caitlin, who was not able to be here tonight, and I were in a state call recently about transportation, and there was a community that had received a grant to pay for transportation to certain events, and they have had no uptake on it. And so there was a big discussion about why were people, even when it was free, not utilizing the system. So they started to kind of ask people who had come or carpooled. And what they found is that it really was what you're saying, an issue of not really knowing how to use or how to access the transportation that was available. And so it really did seem, even when they try to remove barriers and get the campaign out, that people, I think if you grew up in a car-centric culture, you might not have ever ridden a bus, and so we were looking at, more educational campaigns so that people can understand how to ride the bus, where the stop is, how to understand a route and the direction it goes. So I think that, that there's a lot of room for more utilization of existing systems here, which would facilitate potentially better funding for more routes if we had more utilization. So it's like, if you can kind of put that horse before the cart and get more people to understand it.
And don't get me wrong, the public transit system, broadly speaking, can be very confusing. I relied on public transit in grad school down in Milwaukee, utilizing Milwaukee County Transit, and it can be confusing at times. Knowing exactly where you're going to be dropped off, knowing exactly when you're going to be picked up, what are the different routes, especially not comparing, not saying that Milwaukee and Point is an apples to apples comparison, but it can be very confusing for the average person.
It can be.
So.
Yeah. Once you get the hang of it, like I did not want to drive again. I was like, this is terrible. I want my bus back. I don't have to think. I can read. But I do think that there's room for growth. We already have the capacity. We just need to, work with people getting a better understanding of it.
Okay. Any other comments?
I think it have some people that where I live, they want to take the bus also, but they don't know how to get around to, So because I'm riding the bus most of the time, so I understand how to take the bus. So I'll tell them how, but some people just don't know what to do. So some people just scared also because, they're going to the Y, and if they take the bus from my location, then they don't know if they have to do a transfer to take another bus, so it's confusing for them. So, yes, I said you just have to ask questions, Otherwise you wouldn't know unless you ask the bus driver, call the bus station and find out. Google is there.
And they offer travel trainer services, so you can make an appointment and have someone help you learn that and go with you and kind of go through every step. But I don't know if people really know that there's an option to utilize a travel trainer.
Okay.
At least from the survey, though, there still are a number of people who feel that it's not a safe option as well.
Yeah.
And so I think that that's something that has to be addressed. Either it's, from a perception or from, reality. Again, I don't know statistics on people that are injured riding the bus, in an unsafe situation. It could just be people, their perceptions of it, but that is something that still should be addressed, I think, in terms of that.
Yes, some people have not wheelchair, but walkers, and they don't know that the bus have this, they can put the, what do you call it? So you can walk and easily, they think they have to lift the walkers, the ramp. They think they have to lift the walk and put it in the bus, so I said you don't have to do that. You have a walker or a wheelchair, and they put the ramp down and you just go onto the bus.
Next topic area focuses on outdoor spaces and buildings. Number 1 and number 2 kind of go hand in hand with one another. First being that there's generally a need for more seating within city parks. And then likewise, a need for more seating within the building and around the site of a community building. So the example I gave there is the courthouse. That's one of several different community facilities that were brought up as specific examples here in Point. But I just wanted to make that note especially is that it's not, when we talk about the need for more seating, it's not focusing solely on outdoor seating. The indoor component of it is significant as well. I mean, just thinking in City Hall, I can't think of a single area to sit through the hallways at all, at least on the first floor. Third, better education on where parks are located and the amenities that are located within, right? What type of equipment, what type of infrastructure is in place, and is that infrastructure accessible for folks in a wheelchair, let's just say. And then lastly, that there's a preference for more social gathering spaces, particularly for the winter months, right? I think we've talked about this in the past, and this kind of touches on, I think, the social participation theme that I'll, on the next slide is just, especially in the winter months, people want to get out of their house into a public venue and collaborate with friends, family, and the like, and they need a venue in order to do so. I think this is one where I think it's more of an educational component. There are definitely areas here in Point that offer that gathering space. It's just a matter of relaying those spaces and the amenities provided within each of those venues, relaying that information out to the public. So bring it back to the group for this one as well. Then we'll do lightning round.
For seniors, Schminckley Reserve is doing really, really well right now. Everybody's walking there because there's a heated bathroom. It's the only park, it's the only place in town where you may need to make a stop.
Yeah.
I know it's expensive to do otherwise, but it's very obviously the parking lot over there is doing well.
I think these will, like I mentioned, we'll do a little bit more of a lightning round. So next one, talking about civic participation and employment. First one being that there's great unknowns that exist about one's financial health in the long run, in the future. The one comment I had on there is, again, is this more noise in the data, i.e., is this perception that folks are raising due solely because of the economic conditions that exist today versus that of 2 years from now, if things change for the better or for the worse, how will that contribute to ultimately our work within this aging plan? So something to kind of keep in the back of your minds in terms of how we address the employment factor and why people may choose to stay in their place of employment longer on in their life. That's a big reason for it, the great unknowns that exist because of their own financial well-being once they reach retirement. Number two, kind of similar, so a greater recognition that people will have to retire later in life, i.e. that they have to work longer in their career in order to in order to have a stable balance of funds so that they can retire in leisure, depending on how they want to live their retirement years. Number three, some do still want to work as long as they physically, emotionally, mentally can, regardless of if there is a financial need to do so. There's folks that choose to work even part-time, let's just say, just as a means of communicating with others, having friendships with other coworkers. It's not strictly a financial need. Number four, particularly for the older population, that they don't want to, this was taken straight out of the survey, that there's not an interest to take self-improvement and educational classes. That I'm kind of curious if that same statistic is consistent with younger populations as well, or if there is a age discrepancy based on generation.
Curious to know education level of that group that took it too, because I don't understand that. And to me, when I retire, I look forward to joining that UWSP Life thing they got. That sounds awesome. I want to take all these extra classes, but that's me. I don't know.
Yeah.
I find that odd. Huh.
I'll have to look again how the question was asked. I think one could perceive it as, do I have to take a college class or some sort of, that type of training in order to apply for this job that I'm interested in. And then the last one, real quick, just unaware of where to look for volunteer opportunities, right? There's a ton, as you all know, are privy to, there's a ton of volunteer opportunities that exist in our city and surrounding us for a variety of different areas of your choosing. I think there's just because it's so overwhelming of the amount of options that exist, people don't know where to start and where to find that information. So, thoughts from the group?
I guess the last one was surprising to me, just knowing the United Way's Volunteers Rock. And I feel like there's been a lot of promotion that's been done in that. So it's just surprising that people still don't know where to go.
There is. I think there's lots of volunteer opportunities, but I also can see where some individuals or the community may seem it's cliquey.
Oh, maybe.
So it's hard to get in.
Oh.
something, not hard, but they're afraid because they may not know anybody in the organization already.
That's a good point.
So, and that's hard to take that first step into,
Sure, that makes sense.
yeah.
Good point.
My only other comment on this employment issue is that for individuals under 60, we know that there are far fewer people who have pensions. And there might be more of a desire to work longer or work part-time as we head into the next set of aging and retirement eligible individuals. Like 50% of people 60 right now don't have savings. Like, so we're really surprised, but these numbers are coming in really hard.
And I think to say a quiet realization out loud is that there's still a stigma that exists of people choosing to work later in life. The stigma as in, I'm thinking kind of from like an employment law standpoint that may exist from some employers. There might be the soft pushing of roles and responsibilities for an individual who's of a certain age. You know, the relationship from employee to employee, how that relates, especially when you're factoring different generations working in the same room, different generations of employees working in the same room, that I think there's a quiet realization that there is some biases that exist in the workplace today. Even with the advancement of rules and regulations behind employment and human resources, there is still that realization. I don't know if we can necessarily capture it. That's above all of our heads, but, right? I think that's just more implicit biases that people portray at times.
Yeah. But I think there's a lot of economic opportunity for employers that are willing to forego their bias and see the value of a diverse generational workplace and the value of people with a lot of life experience working in their workplace.
So then the next three areas, there's definitely some parallels between each of them. So communication and information, first off, generational divides in terms, as you all know, generational divides in terms of how folks obtain their information, what source they use to obtain information, right? Older generations may be more willing to, or more accustomed to getting their news from television, through newspapers, versus that of Gen Zers, millennials, who are more willing to use social media as that platform. And then the second one, the more just great unknowns of the options that exist. I think this is an issue and an opportunity that all of you face, is that there's so many different sources of, sources of communication that you can leverage, that you can use, and it can be overwhelming in terms of which platform you choose, which platform you don't choose, right? Ultimately, it's very hard to, not very hard, it's very easy to miss some people depending on what type of platforms you use. If you put all your efforts in social media, you're naturally going to miss a certain subset of the population. So, yeah, just more general unknowns of all the different options exist and what are the different levers that folks can use to obtain that information from each of those sources. Respect and social inclusion, again, generational divides, in a way kind of touching on what we just talked about, and that there's kind of the implicit biases that do exist in the workforce and our society, generally speaking, as it relates to how different generations interact with one another, communicate with one another. And then lastly, the social participation missed one. Going back to respect and social inclusion. So the second bullet point, civic participation provides the conduit for the inclusion of people by age, class, gender, etc. Basically, what I mean by that is this prong over here, having areas where people can frequent, can commingle, can communicate, that really serves as that platform. That serves as that big first step to allow people to to allow people of different ages, of different backgrounds, of different perspectives to commingle and communicate their ideas, communicate their preferences with one another. And then lastly, social participation. Again, generational divides exist in terms of who they stay connected with. Younger populations, they more stay connected with their friends, their family, their coworkers, a more wider range of folks versus that, and this was taken more from the survey results, that folks in the older generation, that they more so keep their family in their tight social circles, and to a lesser extent, friends. Can't really speak much to that, if that's just the fact that we had maybe about 100 people fill out the survey, that there's some biases, that there's some discrepancies in the data results, but I don't know. I see you have some thoughts, Kate. I don't know what you wanna. What's your thoughts?
That's right. Okay. We know that older adults everyone benefits from a diverse social network.
Yeah.
And I'm probably biased because of what I do, is I see a lot of older adults have very diverse networks, lifetime friendships, more recent friendships since retirement, friendships developed in their neighborhood, relationships with their church, relationships with volunteering. Obviously, there are older adults who may be more insular or may be very focused on their family. We see a lot of older adults are caregivers for grandchildren and things like that. So I think there's just a rainbow of it. I hesitate to make a blanket statement that older adults don't have a lot of friends, because that's not what I see bearing out.
Do other folks agree?
Yeah.
Yep.
That's the purpose of the conversation. So I'll strike that out. Perfect. Like I said, ultimately, more data, the more accuracy that exists. So it could just been a case where we didn't have a crazy amount of people who answered that question. And then the last one, just wrapping up social participation. As we talked about in the past, isolation exists even more. Isolation exists amongst folks who completed the survey, but as I mentioned early on, there are still folks in our community who experience a sense of isolation, but who are just not comfortable of sharing their feelings, sharing that situation to another person. So. Again, talking about the reliability of data that's received, I think that topic area especially is one where you're not going to get truly representative results from the survey just based on that factor. And then lastly, health services and community services. Number one being lots of uncertainty about the affordability of home care services. I think we all could go on and on about that. And then really a fact that everybody is aware of, just that we have a lack of caregivers that exist not only in our community, but really across the state and across the nation. So I'll kick it back, more general thoughts about all 8 domains that we touched on. Is there anything that you think is missing that should be added that we didn't talk about? Is there anything besides the who folks stay connected with by generation? Is there anything on here that should be striked out from what we talked about? Okay. So that's kind of big, overarching 30,000 foot view picture. As I mentioned, and this will be a really good segue to item number 4, which I'll have Kate kick us off. Really, these themes, these general takeaways are going to be really helpful to determine what the structure of this aging plan will be, and ultimately what are the recommendations that we want to flush out. These themes are going to help create those specific recommendations that will serve us over the next 5, 10 plus years. So, Kate, I'll segue it back to you for number 4, and then we can.
Okay, number 4, we will discuss the structure and scope of the Stevens Point Aging Plan.
So, I think the big question that I have for you is more so the extent of the the planning document. And what I mean by that is, I think our first meeting when we had Darren here, this is a recommendation that ARP gives for other age-friendly communities, as was the case when he presented to us during our first meeting, was that their recommendation is that we should pick 2, 3, 4, pick a couple of these domains to focus on and solely focus on those areas for the aging plan. Personally, I kind of have a different approach to it. I have a different feeling to it for a couple of reasons. One, if we're going through this effort, I'd rather put a little bit more time and energy in to make sure that each of these areas are represented in the plan, instead of, frankly, us as a commission having some bias in terms of which one of these areas we think are more important, right? And I think a second reason why I'm personally of the preference that we touch on all 8 is that through this quantitative data, through this qualitative data, there isn't one of these areas that folks say, hey, Stevens Point, we're great. There's nothing more we need to do. There's work we need to do on every single one of these. Don't get me wrong. I think the housing, transportation, the parks prong, those are definitely areas that folks talk about a lot, that I think there's some wide room for improvement, but it's not to negate the fact that kind of these bottom 5 are not important, that are not expressed as an issue that we in our that we as a community have by folks who participate in the process here over the last year. So kind of big picture that I want to ask you folks is, should we focus on all 8 of these, or should we narrow it down to a specific number? If it's the latter, then the conversation will lead to, well, which ones, right?
Yep. All right.
So I'm going to kick it back to the group, just start the conversation. What's thoughts that anybody has at this point?
There's a lot of overlap in those last 5, I think.
For sure,
In some parts, yeah.
For sure, these bottom 3.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yep. So that would make it more doable.
Because we're not married to 8, we could like combine a few
We could.
into under like a different umbrella.
We could. Yeah, you could do 5, let's just say, or 6. Let's just say you could touch on these 5 individually and then couple these 3 as
Those.
one. Other thoughts from the group?
Yeah, because definitely the 3 are a given. The housing, outdoor spaces, buildings, transportation, those are major, so I think we definitely need to focus on those.
Yeah.
And will be hopefully doable to focus on them. That's me.
Do you
Anyone
have
else?
examples from other communities of what they've done? Have they kind of taken the approach of going with all 8 or?
It's been a scattering. City of Sheboygan is one example where they've touched on each of the 8. Some other communities, thinking some of the suburbs of Milwaukee, the city of Milwaukee, they've selected about 3 or 4 of these. So, like I said, I know ARP kind of shuns in a way, focusing on all 8, but clearly it hasn't stopped some communities from saying we're going to stick with all 8 anyways. So
There's an interesting movement in the nation right now toward multi-sector aging plans at the state level, and then kind of coming down through counties to cities. We might want to take a look at how multi-sector aging plans are structured, because they kind of tackle a lot of these elements from a perspective of, this similar, but Wisconsin is looking at becoming a multi-sector aging plan state. And it might be nice to, like, project ourselves a little bit into, and explore if multi-sector aging plan structure might be a way to go, because it seems to be where the state of Wisconsin is going.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Can you explain what multi-sector aging is?
Multi-sector aging plans, so in, like, for example, Wisconsin right now, the Bureau of Aging Disability Resource does an aging plan through our Title III grant so they create an aging plan, and then each county, like Portage County's ADRC, has a 3-year aging plan, which I would like to hopefully see if maybe we can align Stevens Point and Portage County together at some point. But it just looks at, really the areas of funding under Title III, and how are we going to, spend that money? How are we going to improve those things? So there are caregiving and the resource centers and things like that.
Okay.
A multi-sector aging plan would bring in transportation, and it would bring in, housing. It would bring in all of the sectors. So it's kind of like taking what AARP is doing and then making it something that would be initiated through the governor's office, and then it would involve all of these groups. So people in transportation, people in healthcare, would become a more detailed plan that would really impact these domains that we're talking about, versus the old-fashioned plan where it's just like, we're going to silo this funding, we're going to silo these people. Yeah.
Thank you.
Any other thoughts? Otherwise, at least what I'm hearing is there's some domains that we could couple, social participation, respect, and social inclusion, and then communication and information. We can couple some of these into one instead of separating them. But to Kate's point, also, and I think this was something I think is really key for any aging plan, is making sure it is compatible with comparable plans from different levels of government. So, right, I'm sure there'll be a lot of communication that I'll have with you directly to making sure that the counties, your work with the ADRC, that their plan is consistent generally with what we as a city will be doing.
Yeah, and I think there's a lot of really great stuff that isn't typically in an ADRC aging plan that this has, so I'm hoping that we can start to look at more broadly how we do that plan. The other thing with the aging plan is, I'm in my third now, is creating actionable, like, quantifiable goals, something that's doable, and not too many. Just to get started.
This was this was 1 or 2 grad school classes in a nutshell. Literally outlining
goals.
specific goals and objectives and policies. Goals, making it overarching. Objectives, making sure that it's quantifiable in terms of time, in terms of what end goal you're looking to achieve. So I agree with you. I don't want to have 20 different policy recommendations for each of these. Like, keep it reasonable.
But I wonder, for people who've worked in planning in other areas from aging, what that looks like, and if there's anything we could use, like, from those places.
I guess it depends on, like, what is the actual impact we're trying to achieve here, right? Is this just a plan? Is it going to have money behind it? Is it going to, is the mayor going to get behind it? What I'm saying is like, or is this just going to be something like a lot of things that are just kind of put together, put out there, and say, okay, good job, guys, and then you move on.
So ultimately, the council would have to adopt this plan as well. So naturally there would be buy-in as a result of that, through seeking that approval. As far as the adoption, don't get me wrong, the biggest stigma, the biggest slight that folks have about planners, the planning profession, broadly speaking, is that we go through all this time and energy, this passion for creating a plan, but once that plan gets approved, you let it sit on a shelf and collect dust.
Right.
Right? I think it's really imperative for me and as this commission, and for this commission as well, when the time comes that we adopt the plan, we don't just clean our hands and say we're done. That really this next meeting, those subsequent meetings that we have is sifting through the policy recommendations and see what's some low-hanging fruit that we can achieve right now. What are some long-term aspirations that may need outside funding, and if so, what are some funding sources that we can use to try to make that reality? So, yeah, there's going to be work involved, but I think as a collective group here, I think we can definitely make some of these policy recommendations become reality in short order. So. Yeah. So I think I got some direction there. And then I think the other big question that I have for you is more, how I envision 2025 going is really sitting down, hunkering down, and starting to write this plan, right? Folks that I've worked with in the past for other long-term plans, they've taken one or two approach, and there's nothing wrong with either approach. As it relates to a commission, to you as a commission, would you prefer me to write the plan from start to finish and then give it to you in draft form and let you critique it in its entirety, or would you rather have me give you sections, give you specific sections at a time so you can review? So say, I work on the housing section first, and you'll review that, say, in February. Next time we meet, we'll focus strictly on the transportation section. Next time we meet, we'll focus on the parks section. I guess what's the preference that you would rather have as a group? Would you want to see it all in one lump sum, or broken down into different topic areas?
I think broken down.
out.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, as we've already indicated, some of these areas are going to overlap, so it's possible in one section, some things that you identify, we can easily apply to the next section.
Okay. This is the first one that I mentioned. That's the route that I took for the historic pres plan, and they liked it. So that's the only reason why I brought it up, because they liked hunkering down and reviewing the whole thing from start to finish. So, okay, I think that's so. Just in terms of the structure, then, of what this aging plan would be, loosely speaking, how I would see this shaking out is, first section would focus more on existing conditions. So what's some statistics that we as a community have as it relates to some of these different topic areas? What are some of the existing organizations here in town and the surrounding area that contribute to aging in place, broadly speaking? That kind of focusing on section 1, section 2, talking about the planning process. So how do we get from start to finish? Section 3, really the meat of the document, focusing on the specific goals, objectives, and policies for each of these domains. And then the last section focusing on the implementation piece. So, hey, we recognize these policy recommendations we want to do. Which of these should take priority? Which of these should be the ones that we focus all of our time and energy right from the onset, versus those that it'll be we'll be shooting for the stars. It'll be aspirational if we can complete it, but it's not important at this time. So that's kind of just the rough structure. I just wanted to bring that out, just so as we look in the next as we work in the next year or so. That's kind of the structure that I'm taking. So I think what I'm going to be doing going forward, for the month of January, I'll pick one of these sections to work on some goals, objectives, and policies. And then maybe later in January, February sometime, we'll meet back up as a group and sift through that. So.
Perfect.
Any other comments that we want to have for item number 4?
Okay.
I will kick it back to the chair.
Moving right back to you with staff updates.
Thanks. That was a quick turnaround.
Get whiplash.
That's right. So 3 updates. First one, this is actually going through the approval process right now before our Plan Commission and Council, and that is cities working with the State Department of Transportation to do some curb ramp replacements for the Highway 66 corridor and the Highway 10 corridor. One thing I'll note is, say for example, the Highway 66 corridor, that's not focusing solely on the chunk of highway along the airport, along Marshfield Clinic. Center Point Drive, for example, that's technically part of the Highway 66 corridor. You see it by the signs, but it's not readily known from folks that that's included as part of the Highway 66 corridor. So as part of this project, there'll be roughly 300 existing curb ramps that will be replaced, and those curb ramps will be replaced because they don't meet current ADA requirements. So there's not a timeline in terms of when this will start and when this will ultimately be completed, but I wanted to let you folks know, since ultimately transportation is one of the 8 domains that we will be talking about, and I think this is a really good project that you folks should be made aware of. Next update, and Sarah, you'll be more involved with this tomorrow. God, I had to think of that as tomorrow.
I know. We're back to back.
Yes. So Safe Streets and Roads for All grant. So just quick background on this. This was a federal grant that we received from the U.S. Department of Transportation late last year. Essentially, this grant will focus on 3 deliverables. One, producing a comprehensive safety action plan. What this plan is to identify locations here in Point and in the broader Portage County region that have a inherent higher traffic safety risk. This would be based off of crash data that's received. This would be based off of near misses that folks hear just through this quantitative data that's collected. Ultimately, these locations are identified, and it's the role of an outside firm to come up with design recommendations to help remedy that concern. It could be large scale improvements like converting an intersection into some other type of design. It could be smaller stuff like improved painting, lighting, signals at a given intersection, say that doesn't have signals. So it's a wide range of scope in terms of improvements that can be done. So that's the first deliverable. Second deliverable is to update the county's 2014 bike ped plan. General rule of thumb for the planning profession is that the viability of a long-range planning document is 10 years. Once you reach that 10-year timeline, you really need to look at doing an update, so this will help achieve that. And the third one, and this will be more visible for us as a community as we enter into 2025, and that there will be pilot projects or demonstration activities that will occur through the summer, spring, and fall months of next year. So these demonstration activities essentially will be, hey, we're going to test out certain design strategies at an intersection at a given corridor to see, does this work or not? If there's an interest, say, in a residential intersection to have a mini roundabout, you could have some sort of temporary installation in the center of the intersection to help mimic a mini roundabout for a week, 2 weeks, whatever. So expect to see a number of these demonstration activities again during the warmer months next year. So as it relates to this update, this is a long segue to say we're at the point now in working with our consultant team that they have identified some proposed study areas. So these are specific intersections here in Point and the broader county that they want to look at, that they want to include as part of this overall grant. I did include that in the packet here, so this would start on page 67, running through page 75 of the packet. The first chunk focuses on local system intersections, so these would be intersections under city jurisdiction, village jurisdiction, county jurisdiction, and then the second section would focus on intersections solely under state or federal jurisdiction. A lot of these focuses on off-ramps and on-ramps for I-39, for example. So this isn't homework for you. If you're interested in it, feel free, but take a look at these these initial round of draft study areas and see, are there certain intersections identified that you don't think are an issue as it relates to the accessibility of it? Are there locations, are there intersections not identified on this plan that you think should be, that ought to be? Ultimately, as part of this comprehensive safety action plan, there will be one sub-consultant that will be working on this plan. That will be R.A. Smith, firm based out of the Milwaukee area. Their job will solely be focusing on improving the accessibility of our street corridors and intersections, focusing solely on the accessibility component. So if you're interested, if you want to take a look and give me your thoughts, let me know. You're more than welcome to do so. It's not a requirement. Sarah, it probably will be for you as a Square A task force member. So.
Yeah.
And then lastly, historic preservation plan. That is the aforementioned long-range planning document that going through the approval process right now. There are some accessibility and aging principles that's included in there. One of them being to formally create an ADA transition plan. Different topic area, preservation planning and aging planning, don't get me wrong, but there's some correlations between the two. So that's going through the approval process right now and will be on the council agenda for next week, Monday. Gave you a lot there, so.
So how long is this, what's the time period
For
these?
so
Is this a year's worth of data, or is it
that is, I believe, about 10 years.
10 years? Okay. Okay.
So most of that data was taken off of the community maps.
Got it. For 10 years?
Yep.
Okay. Okay. Interesting.
And I think, just to touch on that real quick, I think a really important need for outside folks reviewing these proposed study areas is the fact that there's a lot of near misses that occur that is not populated in any data, right? So are there any intersections that you see constantly folks almost getting rear-ended? Obviously, since it's not going to be included in the data, that's something that we want to know.
Yeah,
So.
because these are just recorded accidents.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and based on the level of severity. So the ones that have a higher level of severity, they're the economic loss column that gets higher and higher and higher.
Yep.
So you see, like, in terms of the state intersections, the intersection of Highway 10 and Maple Bluff is the highest in terms of economic loss and the frequency of crashes that occur. Or not the highest.
I know I'm getting the nitty gritty.
Yeah.
What's considered economic loss? Do you know what those
That's,
points are?
yeah, so that's, I don't know how they,
How they determine how much, like, because
so
I
it's-
see the amounts, but
Yeah.
how do they determine, is it like damage done, people out of work? Like, do you know what I mean?
yeah, that I don't know exactly.
Okay.
Maybe a good
I will
question for
ask, yeah.
tomorrow. I'm assuming that would be, yeah, the vehicle, damage to the vehicle
Yep.
itself. If there's an injury on the
Yep.
individual or individuals,
Yep.
that would be factored into it.
Okay.
Probably insurance.
Yeah, yep. No, that makes sense.
Oh,
The footnote indicates a KA, a B, a C, and a PDO.
Yep, but how did they get to those numbers?
Okay.
That's what I was wondering.
Yeah.
Yeah, how do they determine the amount of those? I will ask that tomorrow. Yeah.
Anything else? Motion to adjourn.
So moved.
And all in favor?
Aye.
A video of this meeting is available for viewing on the city's website, stevenspoint.com/videos.